So, we're going to start off very much as on an overview. Effectively, so obviously, thank you very much for coming. Uh, Now, the first thing I'd like to start off is if anyone thinks that the enjoyment of their players is not the top priority, then just leave because you're not going to learn anything. Um, the best thing to remember is at the end of the day, this is a game and everyone should enjoy it, including the DM. Now, as a DM, you take on the responsibility of ensuring that game is enjoyable for everyone. This can be a thankless task, but you should try to have the mindset that as long as you give it your all, at the very least, you can be satisfied with your work. Ultimately, you are creating an art piece. True that everyone else you show this art to can influence the colours and shape, but it is your art. How good it is dependent on how much you want your creativity to shine. A few players can leave the game, but the game continues. The moment a DM leaves the game, even if replaced by another DM for a pre-made module, it is no longer the same game. It takes a lot to master the craft, but the core skills you need are the abilities to listen, adapt, and improvise. The pressure is real, the burnout is real. I always remember a few simple facts. A, there aren't enough dungeon masters. B, players can wait literally months to join a game. And C, players can often forget the value of being part of a consistent game right up until they no longer have it. Any DM that forgets that is irresponsible of the hopes and expectations placed upon them. Now, when I remember this, and knowing the pain of not being able to play, and knowing some people literally have no other way to express themselves in life, and countless other reasons, I always find the will to carry on, to provide an experience for people.
Good evening.
So, good evening. So, by the end of the night, I would hope that everyone would have found their own reason to keep on doing it, their own way to combat the burnout, the fatigue, and the feeling of not being good enough. Now, I'm happy to answer any questions along the way. So, we'll bring us to our second aspect of the night, which is preparation and time management. Now, prep is always a real thing, even in modules. Players know when no prep is done. The games suffer, the experience suffers. So for this, I'm going to keep things general and assume we're doing a homebrew. The first thing you'll need is an idea. What scenario would you like to make a game for? Lord of the Rings style? A pirate game or a Monster of the Week formats? Once you have a concept you like, pitch it to your players. If they like it, great. If they don't, work together to tweak it into something you all want. If you really want to play it, and they don't, best find another group, even if they're friends, which I know is easier said than done, but you shouldn't run a game if you don't want to. It will be doomed to fail. After the concept is agreed, you need to decide on a theme. What's the story about? What do you want to present? General themes are a good start. Revenge, war, conflict, the quest for the MacGuffin, find the fable, whatever you can. From there, you decide on a start, a middle, and an end. The defining points of the game that you work to. These will be the moments you initially imagine that you will work towards building in the campaign. That will make or break the entire thing. A shocking reveal, a crushing defeat, the reveal of an enemy, whatever you want. From there, I work on connecting them. A journey, a change, a completion of goals, whatever you want. Now you have the ideas to connect these moments, then you work on fleshing out those details. This will be the bulk of the time. Maybe weeks. This is where your world is inadvertently created. You need the party to meet this NPC who has the key, so where should they meet them? A magical forest? Are they the king or mayor? Create the area around them. Now you have the Mystic Forest or the ancient city of Fardras. Now, overall, 12 main areas are a good target. 25 main areas is probably too much. Remember, you can always add things later. Right now, we are building the bridge of the narrative. By the time you've connected the dots and conjoined beginning, middle, and end, you have yourself a narrative and half a world. The other half comes from the session-to-session stuff. For best results, I'd say give it 2 weeks between a session to truly flesh out everything for what the players can reasonably expect to face in their next session. But weekly is good too. 3 to 4 weeks might be challenging to keep the players engaged to the point they can coherently remember from start to finish. Your players are not going to see the sunken city of the Tritons when they are in a pyramid in the desert, at least in lower levels. So focus on only what you have to focus on. But with the in-between sessions, you can choose an NPC, a place, and mini concept that would be interesting for a session. Effectively, a self-contained one-shot that ties into the narrative. A fine balance to make, but it keeps games fresh and prevents them from going stale. Now, ideally, you want 4 to 5 hours a week getting ready. Is there any questions at this point?
Nope, no questions from me.
That's straightforward so far, thanks.
Okay. So, when you start running a game, you have to be aware that everything is time. You only have however many hours that you've agreed upon to play to tell that self-contained story. My general games are about 3.5 hours long, maybe 3 hours long, give or take. And I know what I would like to tell in that story. Now, whether or not I can tell that story is entirely up on what the players want to do in that session. Now, the way I work around it is I get to know the players. I get to know what it is that their characters want to do, what they want to do as players. And from there, I can create a reasonable algorithm, as it were, to determine exactly what is possible in a session. Are they about to go murder hobo? Are they about to kill everything around you? Because that can very much happen. And you need to be aware of the unexpected stuff. So you have, I'd say, a mental backup plan just in case that sort of thing does actually happen. In terms of when you're running the session, when you have a segment of, say, role play, it's good to keep an eye on the clock. You want to keep, if it's an important role playing, like a very important role play, you want to keep it roughly around 15 minutes, but it can overlap, and it is okay to overlap if it doesn't get stale. If it constantly builds upon itself, and if it ends up becoming a session entirely of talking, then at the end of the day, that is okay. It might not be what you wanted to initially do, but if it's what the players wanted to do, then that's okay. Now, the players can say to you at any point, I'm bored of this, let's go do something else, and some people are quite that open, and then others aren't that open. And you as a DM need to be aware of those keys, those signals. But we'll get into that later on in this instructional hour. So I would say a good rule of thumb is to keep role-playing aspects at half an hour maximum in a session. I like to I like to chop it up in about 5-6 minute segments, really. So when people are, talking and interacting with each other, just, keep an eye on the clock, and when it starts to when it ends. And if they're still in the middle of talking something, then wait for a cue when the talking becomes a little bit less, and instead of talking about important things, they just kind of waffle on RPing stuff, flavor stuff, which is really good. But if you don't want the game to become stale, you have to kind of nudge them on a little, because not everyone wants to talk around playing all the time. Well, no, sorry, not everybody wants to, just sit around talking all the time. That's not their best idea of a game. So when you get that next cue, just sort of step in and almost as if like kind of reading a narrative. You say, so your characters continue to talk. You get yourselves some food from a local food stand. You munch down it, and you have a generally pleasant afternoon. And that's and it's an acknowledgement of what the players wanted to do. And it's an acceptance that the player or the characters have had that time that they want or clearly wanted to have with each other in order to interact and bond as characters. Now, as players, maybe they want to do it a little bit longer, but if it's the whole group, it's fine. But if it's if certain players are not getting enough time to do something, then as a dungeon master, you have to step in and basically put the full stop on that sentence and say, right, so you've had your fun, your characters have bonded, now we're going to move on to the next spot where other people can have a chance to get involved. Likewise, if you are in a segment that is entirely about roleplay downtime, then you put a full stop on it, and then you immediately turn around to another player, probably the person who has not spoken the longest, because they're probably thinking, when am I going to get to do something? I'd like to do something. I'm part of this group too. Have I been forgotten? Because no, you don't forget other people. Sometimes some players have a lot of confidence in themselves, and they take a front row and center of certain aspects of the game, namely the role play or the exploration or even the puzzle solving. Now, that is fine, but you have to keep a lid on it, otherwise they get main character syndrome, which is where they believe the game revolves around them and the party cannot function without them, both in character and out of character. And you don't want that to happen, because they're probably going to be an exceptional player and they bring so much to the game. And the last thing you want to do is tell them to tone it down, stop your creativity, or I'm going to have to remove you because you're taking it away from other players. But sometimes those decisions have to be made. Effectively, it comes down to time management. Everybody should get an equal amount of time. Everybody should have their opportunity say and do what they want to do to make themselves feel valued, make themselves feel a part of that campaign. At the end of the session, if somebody feels that they have not had their time to be not themselves, but their character, their form of escapism, if they haven't had their equal time to step into their character's shoes and be that other person, then they're going to think to themselves, well, why the hell did I even bother turning up to this session? Like, just to see the story? Well, I can read Harry Potter and get a good story out of that. I wasn't part of that, so why should I watch a novel? You don't want that, and you want people to generally enjoy the time and effort that you have put in to entertain them. And if somebody is not being entertained by that, then it is your responsibility. It is, you have to accept all of the faults, all of the errors, and you can either try to fix them on the fly, or sometimes you can just say, hey guys, I'm sorry. You put your hand up and say, I'm sorry, I should have done this differently, and I will learn from this experience. And generally, that's absolutely okay. If some players can get very upset over this sort of thing, but generally talking to them is a good way to counteract that. But that will be discussed later on. Ultimately, it does come down to everybody. There should be about 30 minutes of pure role play. It doesn't even have to be intense role play. just roleplay itself, flavor roleplay. You want about half an hour. So that's how I do it is I would dedicate half an hour of my 3 hours of session to just roleplay, silly roleplay or whatever. I would then dedicate maybe another 30 minutes to descriptions, to describing the world around them and explaining the situation. Make it very clear, make it very concise for your players. Give them, present with them the world, present with them the boundaries of that world, and tell them, right, what would you like to do within those boundaries? Because every player wants to do absolutely everything they can possibly do, but if you give them everything, if you let them do everything, then it's going to be pure chaos, and you're not going to be able to run a narrative that you want to tell, which is going to take away your enjoyment as a dungeon master. Now, some detractors from that can say it's railroading. You're guiding your players to do a specific thing that you want them to do, which is true to a point. But at the end of the day, there is a campaign that every single player joins the campaign knowing that there is something to do in that campaign. And if you're not doing that campaign, then it's pure chaos and nothing is gained. And games like that are fine, as one shots or, as, a self mini session of maybe 4, maybe 5 sessions. But you'll find that if you're trying to create a full-fledged game, proper campaign, the start, middle, and end, and you let your players go into it and you let them do everything you want and you just react to everything that they do, the game becomes chaos, and 9 times out of 10, that game will boil down and fizzle out and people will quit because it just gets stale and boring within 5 sessions. And I've seen it happen time and time again. So this is where you need to direct the players to the point where, you can have offshoots. It's absolutely fine. You can have wacky adventures. To reference a popular show of Critical Role, there was a segment in which a character, the characters are eating chicken at dinner, and they decide to show off by shooting the chicken with an arrow, and they rolled a natural 1, and they accidentally shot one of the characters, and it was a good laugh all around, and that's absolutely fine. But if you just keep on doing the same thing over and over, nothing is done, and everybody may have a great time, but then they'll realize that effectively, in a way, it is kind of having too much of a good thing will just make that real good thing just stale, and you won't want it anymore, and it won't have that same effect anymore. So that is where it comes on to, as a DM, you need to guide them in the right path, but let them choose their right path. Make them realize that at the end of the day, there is a campaign to complete, and you can complete that in however you see fit. But don't let it descend into chaos. And if the things are getting too out of hand, then just tell your players, look, guys, we do have things to do, and you don't have to speak to them as characters, speak to them as players and say, look, this is the situation at the moment, and I'd love to, have you shoot chickens and shoot yourselves in the kitchen just for funsies, but we've wasted the last 2 hours on this, and we're never going to complete the campaign at this rate, and I feel like I haven't gotten any satisfaction out of this game. Because it is a give and take situation. The players give to you what you want, which is, to see your ideas come alive through them, then to expand on those ideas and create a collaborative storytelling. But at the same time, if you don't push that narrative, then it's just going to fizzle out. And ultimately nothing would have been gained, nothing would have been accomplished. And one of the main things of being a dungeon master and a player is that you go into this game and you accomplish things, and you genuinely feel that sense of accomplishment. You get to do things in Dungeons and Dragons that you don't get to do anywhere else in life. But that only happens with guidance. So 30 minutes of roleplay, 30 minutes of descriptions and guidance from a dungeon master. Then you want to dedicate maybe about an hour and a half to combat if you were going to have combat in that session. Now, for smaller groups of maybe 2 to 4 players, combat could be probably done in about 30 minutes, and that's fine. For larger groups, you're looking realistically from 45 minutes to an hour and a half. Now, the hour and a half is the red limit. I don't like going for an hour and a half on combat because combat does get boring because that is very much a turn-based order and people can wait. If people are waiting 10 to 15 minutes for their turn, then you're not doing it right. You need to be quick and you need to get through the turn order. You need to, if you're not playing online and you're playing a session, what I would do is I have the initiative tracker. I would tell the next person who's in the turn tracker, it's your turn next. And now they have this current player's entire turn to decide what they are going to do next. Now, if it comes to a player's turn and they are still deciding what they want to do, then unfortunately things will slow down. And if this is a consistent thing where, they've been watching the entire combat and they have not been thinking about what their next move is, you might have to talk to them. You might have to mention it to them. So look, combat is taking so long because you're spending 5 to 10 minutes on your turn when you've had 10 minutes, maybe even 15 minutes to try to determine what your turn is going to be. It's part of that collaborative part, really. The only way you're going to be able to keep to a time management is to make sure the players are aware, of the situation. Give them plenty of time to decide their next move. But if they take too long on their turn, then you've just got to speak to them about it. And if it's a consistent thing, then really just the end game is sort it out or be removed, because I can't run a game if you're going to keep on doing this. It's taking away enjoyment from other people. You're spending way too much time on your turn. Other people have their turns too, and ultimately, an effective time management makes an effective session. So that brings us to the final possible half an hour to 45 minutes of the session. And this is what I call the decision part. This is where the players should have 30 minutes to 45 minutes of puzzle solving, serious roleplay, decision making, path taking. This is the stuff, this is their decision of where they are taking the campaign. Where are they going as a party? Now, this time is often mixed over with the description part as a DM of explaining the situation, explaining the room, explaining the environment to the players, and then the players would then make a decision based upon that. So it does mix. However, I like to see a fine line between the two of how much time you need to present the game itself to the time they need to put in working together as a group to overcome a problem, solve a solution, and otherwise just be effective. By the end of it, you would have had 3 hours. You should have been able to do everything you want to do. If not, it's not the end of the world. A good session is when you're able to accomplish over half of what you planned. A great session is where you're able to do everything as planned, and a stressful session is when you do more than you initially planned. Because as part of the preparation of planning the session to session, if you enter into territory that you hadn't planned for, then that comes down to being able to think of things on the fly, having a general idea of what comes next. And as a DM, it's good to be aware of where the party is going during the session, thinking of what's going to happen if they continue going on this path. Right now, they are in a forest, and they're going to be dealing with forest things, and we're going to be here for a little while. But eventually, once they get out of this forest, they're going to be in a swamp, and there's going to be a big swamp monster in this thing. So if they do the initial session was they're going to be in this forest doing forest things, but if they rush through all of that, if they miss the cues, the plot hooks, or just breeze through combat as if it was nothing, get some really damn decent rolls, and that can happen, and they get to the swamp before you're ready, you need to be aware, right, so, okay, so there is a big monster in the swamp. Do I want to throw this out early at them, or do I want to build up to it? So long as you have that core idea of, like, all right, so I haven't fleshed this out, but I have that core idea that I have that thing here that I know that they will either encounter or that they need to do. So I would make very brief notes on the fly if you're in uncharted territories of what you say and what you do and what you describe, because the players will reference it later on. And it's also, you'll find that the idea is that you're able to spew out of your mouth a verbal diarrhea, as it were, often becomes very good ideas once you have the time to flesh it out a little bit more. So like I said, ultimately 3 to 5 hours on a session per week, or double that time on a bi-weekly basis is actually the best thing for it. Too much time spent on it, can make it seem that the world is all about, the session is all about your world, not about the sessions. And it's finding that fine balance. And it also really does depend on the players, but we'll get back to that. So that was going to bring us on to our third point, which is going to be combat balancing and loot distribution. Now, the first aspect of combat balancing is you need to be aware of the maximum and minimum damage that a party can output in a single round. You have a fighter with an 18 in strength, so he's got a +4 in strength. He uses a longsword, which is he also uses shield, which means he uses a 1d8. He's a level 1 fighter, which means he has got so he's pretty limited in what he can do, but he can get a crit. Now, the way I personally do crits is obviously you roll your damage, you double it, and then you add your modifier. So let's say he gets an 8. So now that fighter has now rolled 16, your +4 to it, so that's 20 points of damage in a single turn from one single player. Then you get your, you have your cleric who will cast a guiding bolt, which is 3d6, so that's a maximum of 18 points of radiant damage. So all of a sudden now you have got 38 points of damage. Now, if you've got a big boss that only has 38 points of damage, well, all of a sudden you've got 2 players that have brought it down within 2 turns of the first round of combat. Now, this is very unlikely, but you need to be aware that that is what can happen. So, one of the aspects of combat balancing is finding the right monster or creature or threat for the party itself. So the first thing to be aware of, and this is where I keep notes on every single one of my parties, is that whenever they take a feat, upgrade their stats, get a new weapon that they primarily use and all that, I change the numbers I have for the maximum DP and minimum DP or damage output per round. So I think for one of my groups at the moment, I have currently got the note here that their maximum damage output in one turn is 502. Now, if I throw a monster to them, it's got less than 562 hit points, and many dragons are like that. You can throw a dragon at them, and individually they'll be like, "Oh my goodness!" But if they roll their maximum damage every time, then they've just wasted that dragon, and all of a sudden, this big scary thing is no longer a threat. Now, there are so many different aspects of combat, it's impossible to know them all at once. And I wouldn't expect anybody to know them all at once. But you need to be aware of the strengths and weaknesses of the things you're throwing at the party. The players will remember their own strengths and weaknesses, and they will remind you what they can and can't do in a session. Now, it's a good thing when you pay attention and you listen to them, it becomes a repetitive kind of rhetoric in your head. I can do this, I can do that, I can sneak as a bonus action, I can add an extra D8 to my damage because of this aspect of my character. So the initial thing you do when you first hear of these is that you look at the feats and look at the stats that the rules behind such things. Say we've got a Horizon Walker from Xanathar's Guide for a Ranger who can do Planar Warrior, which adds an extra D8 worth of force damage, and all damage from that weapon is now force damage. So you look up the rule, you look up the feature, you see the rulings behind it, and you know what it can do and what it can't do. And it just kind of, once you read that information, it does get stored into your head somewhere. So then when they do it, they do it within the realms or the confines of the rules as presented, then you don't think about it. But when they do it in a way that it doesn't work, then so long as you read it right and so long as you've heard it enough, the moment that it goes out of those confines, a little bell goes off in your head. You think to yourself, hold on, that doesn't work like that, does it? So in which case, whilst they are doing it, you can quickly look up the ruling, either through books or through online mechanisms. You can see the exact wording of the ruling, and if it's something that requires interpretation, then this is where it's going to be a point of between dungeon masters and players. Players will read it and think, oh, it works this way, so I've built my character around this aspect. Whereas a dungeon master might look at it and say, I would say it works this way, which runs completely counterproductive to how a player wants to build their character. In the event where you are both stuck in your ways, the best thing to do is compromise. Get the best of both worlds. Say, right, I don't think it works this way, but I can see how you want it to work this way. So let's work together and let's create a new ruling behind this that we're both happy with. And if they're reasonable people, they'll say, yeah, no, let's do it this way. Some people are very religious in the terms of rules as written. However, I always prefer rules as intended. Rules as intended is obviously you put the rules in, and you think to yourselves, all right, so this rule was put in for this reason. Now the wording might say this, but you can't possibly, think of every single outcome of that rule. Now, a reference towards this is the infamous peasant railgun, which is 2,000 commoners stand in a line for up to 2 miles, and they all hold their action to pass a spear. So when the first person gets a spear, then they activate their action and they pass the spear along, and so on and so forth, right up until the end. Now, mechanically, within 6 seconds, that spear has travelled 2 miles. That is the speeding average of a projectile fired by a railgun. Now, following the laws of physics, if that spear was then thrown, it would do hundreds of D10s worth of force damage. It's pretty ridiculous. And if you're going to follow rules as written, then the peasant railgun, it's always going to be there. But that's not what's rules as intended, is it? The creators of Dungeons and Dragons didn't sit down and think, all right, so with these rules, I can influence a peasant railgun. I can do it this way, and it's going to work every single time, because those are the rules we've written. Whereas if you think about it from common sense, there's no bloody way a bunch of people with no stats whatsoever can pass a spear within 2 miles in 6 seconds. It doesn't work like that. It can't work like that. Logic fails that. Rules say one thing, but logic, it's troll logic. That's what it is. It's the same sort of logic where you go up a ladder and then you quickly pull the ladder up in front of you, and before you fall down, you keep on climbing up the ladder. And if you do it quickly enough, then you're always climbing up the ladder and you never fall down because you're doing it quick enough. It's troll logic. It doesn't work. Theoretically, it should work if you do it like that, but it doesn't work. So that's why it's an example of why I prefer rules as intended, which means that opens up the aspect that every single rule in the Dungeon Master's Guide, in the Player's Handbook, and every single source book is interpretable. And if you want to differ away from what the standard is, then you need to make that knowledge very early on from with the group. An example of that would be Spirit Guardians, and I've played with lots of groups who like Spirit Guardians because basically you deal tremendous amounts of radiant or necrotic damage as soon as you cast a spell. And then immediately beginning on the enemy's turn, they take that same damage again. So effectively, you're doing the damage twice in one round. The way that the wording is done and the spell makes it contentious at best, and it's definitely open to interpretation. So I would say very early on in a group that if you were going to cast Spirit Guardians, it doesn't hit them immediately as you cast it. It hits them on the beginning of their turn. You can't deal damage twice to them in one round of combat. It's not fair. And if I did it to you, you'd be calling hacks, bullshit. That's not fair. And it's only a level 3 spell, so you're effectively doing the equivalent of, I believe, 16d6 worth of damage, depending on the level of spell, of course. But yeah, in one round of combat, that's not good. It completely blows everything out the park for you. And it's little spells like that that can ruin your combat encounter. So, and this is something that just comes with experience. Eventually, you are going to find a spell, find a feat, find a ruling that people will utilize, and to great success. And you'll think to yourself, wow, that was very powerful. Is that legal? To which you look at it and you'll be like, but this can be done over and over and over again. I don't like that. That makes it difficult for me to balance my combat. So at that point, then you would have to say, look, as a dungeon master, I am ruling that this spell is going to be worked in this way from now on. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm finding it difficult to create effective and challenging combat encounters. Because at the end of the day, if every single combat was super easy, then people would get bored. You don't just want to plow through everything. It can be fun to do that sometimes, especially against really weak and annoying creatures like goblins. Everybody doesn't like annoying goblins that steal stuff off of you and just does all kinds of rude and crude things towards you. And when you're super powerful, you could flick them and blow up their heads. That's a cool moment. And, it can deal with a little bit of satisfaction to just wade through the goblin camp and just waste the 50 goblins. And there's nothing they can do about it because they're not strong enough to truly hurt you or even get past your armor class. But if you did that every single session, 10 sessions in a row, my God, you'd get bored. You get so bored. You wouldn't feel challenged. Because at the end of the day, the only reason you get strong is to take on the higher challenges. You're always being pushed, so you push back harder and harder, and each time push that little bit harder, and that marks your progress. And you think back to those very early monsters, and you think, oh no, they're nothing at all. I've definitely made some progress there. But now we're not dealing with that. Now we're going to be dealing with Cthulhu, the demon lord. Now we have to fight him, and that's going to be an ass. And you could be thinking the exact same thing 17 levels ago against a goblin chief. Well, the goblins are not too much of a threat, but the goblin chief, he's got pretty high armor class, and he's got that parry that throws the goblins in front of him. Now that's going to be super annoying. That's going to be an ass to deal with. It's always about perspective. So when you're designing that particular aspect of the combat, to go back to the basics, you need to be aware of the maximum damage output, and you need to be aware of that. So a good thing to do that is to distribute the amount of damage that can go out in the form of multiple weak enemies. Weak enemies are literally just there to take the hits, to keep the hits of the one guy that you actually want to play with to make this combat interesting. Ultimately, you could do it the other way, in which case you want to play one big monster, and this monster is going to be super threatening to the entire party. However, if you keep with the standard HP and I would reference a Hydra on this. A Hydra has got 172 hit points. They are a huge beast, but against a party of 7 level 6 characters, it's not going to be that much of a threat. So the way to do that, to get around this, is you can make the monster even bigger, and then you can give them 272 experience points, give them an extra 100 HP. That makes them stay in the fight a little bit longer. Now, the Hydra has got an ability that makes them heal, but you also are aware that somebody might have the ability to prevent it from healing. Or somebody might do something, they might not roll enough damage per turn to destroy a head that would then cause it to regain more hit points. Now, this is obviously a very, general monster. There are loads and loads and loads of different monsters you do from, but a good example is that you make them bigger and you give them more HP. That just keeps them in that fight just a little bit longer. If you want them to be more dangerous, to make the combat a little bit more tense, give them extra abilities. Give them the brute aspect from the bugbears, which gives them an extra a D8 worth of their melee attack rolls. You could give them legendary action. A dragon legendary actions are very, very simple. They can make a perception check. They can beat their wings, or they can make one bite or claw attack. However, if you want to make it even super more dangerous, you could take the very aspect of that dragon and you can give them one legendary action to instantly recharge their fire breath. Now, their fire breath is super dangerous, doing lots of damage with a high dexterity saving throw to get out of the way of. So you don't want to spam fire breath over and over and over and over again. So you would then make the legendary actions cost free. Now, super dangerous creatures would generally have 3 legendary actions, and they only get 3 per round. So if they burn all 3 legendary actions to, say, get their fire breath back, then they have no more legendary actions to find the rogue that is hiding. They have no more legendary actions to make bites at people who are concentrating on spells that are debilitating them. Or they can't make any more legendary actions to beat their wings to get all the people that are swarming them down on the ground. So when they do their fire breath, if they have it back, then when people are prone, they have disadvantage on their dexterity saving throws, which means you've got an even bigger chance of doing it. A dragon is intelligent and will consider these aspects, whereas a hill giant that you just want to be super dangerous with, give them a legendary action to make one single club attack. Now, if the hill giant was on its own, that can even the odds a little bit. Just give it a little bit more of a little more say in the action economy. And obviously, the action economy is how much you can reasonably do in one turn. Now, generally, the side with more turns has the advantage in combat, but it doesn't mean they're going to win because, once again, the enemy who has lower turns might have super high AC, super high damage output, and just not be. They might just be immune to certain effects like charm or sleep or even paralyzation, which is big. There are so many different conditions, and when you're designing or using a creature, you need to be aware of what a player will bring into that combat. Will they? Now you've seen them do. Generally, players are one-trick ponies. With eventually they learn other things, but you're with them each step of the way as they learn those things, and they try things out, see what works. And then when they are happy with what happens, they do it again and they do it again and they do it again. They might not do it every single time, but they will do it in a consistent way that you can then take notice of and be like, okay, so when I'm playing in this encounter, chances are that this fighter is going to bring out the magical +3 Great Axe and just unleash Action Surge in the first round of combat, dealing as much damage as possible in the first round of combat. They like to finish things off super quickly. So you would plan around that, throw something at them that's super hard to hit, super meaty, that can take all of those hits. Or, just put loads of little things in the way, preventing that fighter from getting to the big thing. Practice makes perfect with that certain aspect. So So action economy is the premier thing in regards to how difficult an encounter is. The more turns that you give yourself for a combat encounter, the more chances that you're going to TPK someone or that someone's going to die. Whereas the more turns that you give to the players, it's the easier it's going to be. So in response to that, you just have to make that creature just significantly more tough. So if a player was to take on said monster, it would be a completely one-sided fight. That player would have absolutely no chance whatsoever. But as a group together, the original way that you designed that for, it is going to be, a much more fulfilling thing for you. Loot distribution is this, listening to your players and determining exactly what it is they're lacking. Are they lacking money? Are they lacking magic items? What do they want the most? And, give it to them if they really need it. Give them the healing potions. Let them find the healing potions if they lack a healer in the party. If they lack magic, put spell scrolls in there. Put little things, flavor things. Creatures that are rare, their feathers are, good on the black market, or their poisonous glands are used for components and such like that. You don't want to give them too much too fast, but you want to put a little nugget in every set, so it encourages exploration in your world. If they find a little gold nugget, they'll be super jubilated and elevated. And if sometimes you can make it easy to find, sometimes you can make it hard to find. +3 longsword, for example, can be a powerful weapon. That would be the example of a good golden nugget. And if you want to give that to a level 1 player, then that's absolutely fine. But in terms of balancing, I would say make that a hard nugget to find, but put it in there. Make it possible for them to find it. Because if they do find it, then they'll know it's a powerful thing to find. They'll know it wasn't easy to find. And that sense of accomplishment will overcome them, and that's exactly what you're looking for. And don't be afraid to take items away from well. Make up a reason, be it an enemy steals it, you get stolen from in the middle of the night, a freak storm happens and lightning strikes and breaks this one weapon. I know it's a cheesy way to do it, but if you're finding it difficult and if they have too much and they're not selling the items, then take it away. You are a dungeon master and you do have to make those kinds of decisions. But that brings us on to the fourth aspect, which is every player matters. Every player goes into a session or a game thinking of what it is that they want. What do they want to get out of this game? You need to listen to them and you need to give it to them. You need to. The way I do it is that they present to me their players, their characters, and they'll be like, okay, so what is it that with this particular character do you find enjoyable? What do you want to explore with this character? Oh, I just want to steal everything, or I just want to hit everything. Okay, so those are pretty simple things. So with the stealing thing, the aspect, I say, well, somewhere in the world is a legendary treasure, and you can only get it if you're that good of a. So at some point, eventually they're going to find it, and it's literally that is an entire thing designed for that one character. However, this is also contextual. Sometimes players don't like solo stuff. They like everybody to be able to contribute to everything. And that is good. You need permission from the players to incorporate backstories to do solo storylines. A storyline that includes everybody, but focuses on a specific character. As long as everybody's in agreement on that, then you can have some really interesting character development stories. But you don't want to leave other people behind. So you need to present problems, enemies, NPCs, puzzles that can include the entire players, but with the overarching narrative of this one particular thing. You don't want it to last more than a couple of sessions. The build up to it can be 5 sessions, is absolutely fine. Everybody has a say in the build up, but when you're actually doing the one thing that you want that player to be for, you want to focus on that player for a couple of sessions, build everything from them, and then eventually, other people, they'll be satisfied. Everybody else will have a good time, be along with the ride, and they'll be excited for when it's their time because you want to make sure one is included for everybody. So you build it based on the character they make, what they want as a player, and pay attention to how they play as well. You know, if they're changing their character subtly over the sessions just through natural character development, then it's okay to change what you've written and incorporate that into it. Every player wants to make sure that they want to feel that their choice matters. And the cold to hard truth is it doesn't. What you ate for breakfast doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. You know, what you decided to name that special pet doesn't matter, because that pet can die in a session through a straight arrow or whatever reason. But you need to give it an equal amount of acknowledgement. You don't want a player just to say something and then it could be completely ignored. You need to acknowledge it in some way, even build off of it. I want to go swimming in the water. You know, I want to go hunting for fish. Oh, that's absolutely fine. The tide is a bit tough at the moment, so you know I want you to do this check, otherwise you're gonna be tossed around a little bit at the moment. Oh, you succeeded on the check. That's absolutely fine. You can find a pearl at the bottom of the water, but there are giant crabs there. What are you gonna do? You know, couple of minutes. You know, give them quick decisions to base off of it. But ultimately, it doesn't matter that much. So you don't want to focus too much on those inane decisions that players make on every single session. But you do need to acknowledge them, because it's all that part of being feeling special in a group of special people. Every player needs to feel that at some point during the game in order to make their contribution to that session worthwhile, I think. And that brings us on to the fifth point, which is confidence and voice. Voice is a challenging aspect. Not everyone can do a voice. You can be nasally or gratifying. You can be super high-pitched and posh-like. Or you can be low and dumb and not understand much things. You need to understand what your own aspects and your own limitations are with the voice. Very, very common aspects of the voice is a Russian accent. A lot of people try to do Russian accent, or they try to do a Northerners accent, or a Scottish accent, or an Irish accent. Now, I can't do those accents very, very well, but I give it my very, very best. And that's where the confidence comes in. I know for a fact that my voices aren't perfect to the nth degree, but I put life into them. I try my best to do. I go plunging in, feet first, into the deep end. Sometimes it pays off, sometimes it doesn't, but I don't back away from that. I'm in there, deal with it, basically. Now, the players can think it's rather surreal and be like, oh, you know, it's a bit too silly for me, but whatever. But then other people are like, you know, it's not perfect, but wow, it's quite believable. And that's what acting is. It's confidence. You know, you believe it, therefore other people will believe it. Now, right now, I believe I am a regal king. My word is divine law, and you should all do as I say. If you do not, then I shall send you to the guillotine, and your heads will be lopped off, and I shall think no more of it. Now, in the space of those few lines, I have presented somebody who thinks they're better than everybody else, somebody who's rather aloof, somebody who lives a life of privilege. And I didn't even put on that much of a posh voice. I just put meaning behind the words. I put the feeling behind the words. So when you're coming down to that aspect of trying to present your character or your NPC or whatever it is you're trying to do, you have to understand the motivations behind that character. And even if it's just in passing, you know, somebody you walk into the streets, what kind of person would they be in the street at the moment? Just a simple stable boy? They wouldn't be very educated, because this is a fantasy world and not everybody gets to have state education. So, you know, they work for a living. You know, they get maybe two silvers a week, you know. So their knowledge is going to be limited, and they can either be rather brush about it, or they can just be, you know, happy-go-lucky. So, oh, hey there, fellas, you know, my name's Stuart the Horsehand, and I'm here to help you. You know, a silly little, you know, over-the-top voice like that you know, it's workable. You know, it might not be perfect, but that's just something you just invent on the fly. But so long as you don't shy away from it, you don't back away from it, and you have to remember, at the end of the day, if the players are going to judge you on a voice, remember, they are not judging you, they are judging the character you have presented. No judgments should be in this game. Nobody should be judging anybody in this game. If they are, and if you are doing it wrong. This game is about accepting everyone, accepting everything. Whatever your aspect of life is, this is a game where anybody, any corner of life, can sit down and not be themselves. They can be somebody else. They can escape from the woes and the worries of life. Life is challenging, life is hard, and you don't get that much escape. Sometimes talking to other people in real life is anxiety inducing. It can be hard. Sometimes you just don't know what to say. You don't know how to accept the compliment. You don't know how to walk up to somebody and ask for directions. You just get completely filled with all kinds of self-doubt. But the moment you put on your character's shoes, that character is a bloodthirsty barbarian that doesn't care about being polite, just cares about winning that fight. So, all of a sudden, your anxieties no longer exist. And you just want to hit things. So, I am going to break it all down! You know, and that is how you break those limitations from yourself. By doing that, you can, it doesn't, even if it's not perfect, you can walk into that aspect and realize that I am this person, and this person has never had a bad social experience in their life. And if they have, they're too dense to even understand it was a bad social experience. So, you know, whatever. And at the end of the day, if the players at your table are going to laugh at it, it is because it's a funny thing. This character you have presented, they're not laughing at you. They are laughing at the character. So, just go head first into it. And if it flounders, it flounders. You'll know not to do it for next time, but don't give up. And not until the segment of that particular thing ends. Own it, and then walk on from it if you don't want to do it again. And understand your limitations. Try different accents. Try a Scouse accent. Try a Russian accent. Try a French accent. Try an Italian accent. Or, you know, try mimicking voices that you've heard from popular movies. Smeagol is a very popular voice that a lot of people try to do. But the process is, it's so precious. That's, you know, a general example. I can't do a Darth Vader voice, and I know I can't, because I've tried to do it. But that is another example of, like, when I tried to do it, I went into it head first. You know, I plunged in feet first, tried to do it, realized, I couldn't do it. So I won't do it again. But I'm not going to back away from doing it. I've already started it now. So, find the confidence in the fact that it is not you. And explore what your voice can do. And remember, that brings us to the very, very last point. Everything I said, none of it matters. Because it can all go completely the wrong way. It can go completely different. And that can happen in every single session. You can get that nat 1. You can fail all your death saves against something that you can have possibly failed your death saves against. Your players could, you know, go completely the opposite direction of what you thought it would. You know, your anxiety might overcome to you to the point where your voice breaks. And everything I have said here is relevant to me. But that's what makes it a shared experience. I have experienced this through my time. And maybe you'll experience this too. But you just, at the end of the day, the more you do it, the more experience you get, and the more you realize that it is a lot of what people say about dungeon mastering, that if you want to write a book, go write a book. Don't bring it into dungeon mastering. But you are writing a book. You're writing a book with other people. And how well this book becomes is generally dependent on how well you can understand your players and how well you can expect them to write that book with. And you have no idea how that book is going to turn out. But at the end, when it is finished, it's going to be a work of beauty and art. And you created that along with these very, very special people who spend their time and their energy creating it with you. And that is what matters at the end of the day. Everybody has fun, everybody contributes, and everybody gets to create. Thank you very much for your time.